we bring you the unvarnished truth of law enforcement. This broadcast features unfiltered, unedited, and completely raw footage. Join us as we step onto the front lines of justice, providing a transparent view of the critical moments that shape our society.
I returned my daughter's cup. She lives in that building. I can give you her number right now.
When you just step to the back of the vehicle?
There is nothing in that car. You will not find anything.
Do you have any idea who that man is?
Officer Travis Ellman didn't think twice when he saw a black man briefly stop his car outside a residential building on Castleton Avenue and pass something to a young woman through the window. In his mind, the neighborhood, the car, and the man fit a profile he'd been acting on for years without consequence. He pulled him over 2 blocks later, ignored every word the man said, and ordered a full search of his vehicle on the side of the road. What he didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell him, was that the man whose car he was tearing apart had a federal prosecutor's badge in his pocket and a reputation for cases that ended careers. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from at Bodycam Revealed. If you believe a man should be able to drop something off for his own daughter without being treated like a criminal, hit the like button and subscribe to Bodycam Revealed right now. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October, and Broderick Cortland was running exactly 12 minutes behind schedule. That was unusual for him. Broderick was the kind of man who built his entire life around precision. The kind of discipline you develop when you spend nearly 2 decades inside federal courtrooms where being late, being vague, or being unprepared can mean the difference between justice and a man walking free on a technicality. At 51 years old, Broderick Cortland was a senior federal prosecutor assigned to the Eastern District Office located at 601 Market Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He had tried 43 cases in that building. He had won 39 of them. Several of those wins involved law enforcement officers who believed their badges made them untouchable. But on this particular Tuesday, Broderick wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about a purple insulated cup sitting in the back seat of his silver Audi A6, a cup that belonged to his daughter, Taryn. They had done lunch together earlier that afternoon at Midtown Kitchen on Chestnut Street, a place they tried to get to at least once a month when their schedules lined up. Taryn was 24, in her second year of law school at Temple University's Beasley School of Law, and she had her father's same sharpness, the kind of focus that made professors call on her not to test her, but because her answers made other students think harder. She had her mother's warmth too, which balanced everything out. Lunch had run long the way it always did when the two of them got talking. By the time Broderick dropped her back at her apartment at 2240 Castleton Avenue in the Brewerytown neighborhood, neither of them had noticed the cup still sitting in his cup holder until she was already halfway up the front steps. She texted him before he even reached the corner. "Dad, my cup." He turned around. The whole stop lasted less than 90 seconds. He pulled up to the curb in front of her building, put his hazards on, and powered down the passenger window. Taryn came back out through the front entrance, jogged down the 3 concrete steps, leaned in through the window, grabbed the cup off the center console, said something that made them both laugh, and headed back inside. Broderick checked his mirror, signaled, and pulled back into the street. That was it. That was the entire event. From where Officer Travis Ellman was sitting in his patrol unit parked on the north side of Castleton Avenue near the intersection with Burke Street, it looked like something else entirely. Ellman had been with the Philadelphia Police Department's 26th district for 6 years. In those 6 years, he had accumulated 3 formal complaints filed against him, 2 for unlawful stops, and 1 for use of excessive force during an arrest that the department quietly settled out of court 18 months prior. None of those complaints had resulted in termination. One had resulted in a 3-day suspension that his union grieved down to a written reprimand. Ellman had come back from that suspension and kept working the same streets the same way, because nothing that had happened to him professionally had ever been significant enough to make him change. He watched the silver Audi pull up to the curb. He watched the window come down. He watched a young woman come out of the building, lean into the car, and walk back inside carrying something. In his mind, the sequence assembled itself into something it was not. A car stopping briefly. Something passed through a window. A building he had mentally cataloged as a problem address, though there had been no active narcotics investigation connected to it in over 2 years. He reached for his radio. What Ellman did not do in that moment was consider the hazard lights. He did not consider the relaxed body language of the woman who had walked out, or the fact that the entire exchange lasted under 2 minutes and happened in full daylight on a public street with multiple people visible on the sidewalk. He did not consider any of those things because he had already made his decision before he fully processed the scene. He pulled out and followed the Audi. Broderick noticed the patrol unit fall in behind him about 1.5 blocks after he left Castleton Avenue. He wasn't alarmed at first. Police cars shared roads with everyone else, and Broderick Cortland did not operate from a place of chronic anxiety about law enforcement, though he understood, as a black man in his 50s who had spent his career studying the intersection of race and the criminal justice system, that the anxiety other people carried was earned and rational. He adjusted his mirror slightly out of habit and continued driving, heading toward the on-ramp that would take him back toward Center City. The lights came on at the corner of Girard Avenue. Broderick pulled over immediately and completely, bringing the Audi to a smooth stop along the curb on the right side of Girard near the entrance to a small strip of shops anchored by a pharmacy and a dry cleaner. He put the car in park, lowered both front windows, and placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel where they would be visible before the officer even reached his door. This was not panic. This was practice. This was the calculation that black professionals, black fathers, black lawyers, black men in good cars in American cities, made every single time lights appeared in their rearview mirror. Not because they had done anything wrong, but because the cost of being misread in that moment could be catastrophic. Broderick Cortland knew that better than most. He had read the incident reports. He had seen the body cam footage. He had stood in courtrooms and laid out the sequence of events that began with a routine stop and ended somewhere no one should have been. He put his hands on the wheel and he waited. Officer Ellman approached from the driver's side, one hand resting near his belt, his pace unhurried in the way that sometimes signals authority and sometimes signals something less disciplined than that. He stopped just behind Broderick's window rather than directly beside it, a positioning choice that required Broderick to turn his head awkwardly to make eye contact. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation of why the stop had been initiated. No, do you know why I pulled you over? A question that at least opens a door, even if it's a loaded one. Just the demand, delivered with the flat tone of someone who had already decided the shape of the next several minutes. Broderick kept his voice steady and his movements slow. My wallet is in my inside jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it. He announced it clearly, the way you announce things when you understand that the person in front of you may not extend you the benefit of ordinary assumptions. He handed over his license, reached into the glove box with the same deliberate calm, and produced the registration. Ellman took both without acknowledgement and walked them back to his patrol unit. While he waited, Broderick sat with his hands back on the wheel and looked straight ahead. The pharmacy across the street had a small bench out front where an older woman was sitting with a shopping bag at her feet. A man walking a dog had slowed down on the sidewalk behind him, watching. 2 teenagers on the corner had their phones out. Ellman came back 3 minutes later. He handed the documents back through the window, but he didn't step away. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Broderick turned to look at him directly. "Can you tell me why I've been stopped?" "Step out of the vehicle. I'd like to understand the reason for the stop." "Sir, out of the vehicle, now." There was no legal violation Broderick had committed. No traffic infraction, no equipment issue, nothing that had occurred between Castleton Avenue and this corner that justified a traffic stop, let alone a demand to exit. He knew that, but he also knew that the camera on Ellman's chest was recording, that the people on the sidewalk were watching, and that the most important thing he could do right now was remain exactly who he was, composed, clear, and cooperative, while everything around him was documented. He opened the door and stepped out. Broderick Cortland was standing on the sidewalk on Girard Avenue, with both hands visible at his sides, and he was doing the thing that took more discipline than most people would ever understand. He was staying completely calm while being treated like a criminal for no reason at all. Officer Travis Elmond had positioned himself slightly to Broderick's left, close enough to be intentional about it, and he was looking at Broderick the way some officers look at people they've already convicted in their own minds before a single fact has been established. His body language wasn't aggressive in the loud, obvious way. It was dismissive. It was the particular kind of dismissiveness that communicates, without a single word, that nothing you say is going to matter here. "I'm going to ask you again," Broderick said, keeping his voice even. "What is the reason for this stop?" Elmond didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked one of his own. "Where are you coming from?" Broderick recognized the technique immediately. Answer a question with the question. Keep the subject responding, keep them slightly off balance, and never give them the legal footing they're looking for. He had seen it documented in complaint after complaint that crossed his desk at the Eastern District Office. He had used those very patterns as evidence in cases. He answered anyway because he had nothing to hide and because the body cam on Elmond's chest was still running. "I had lunch with my daughter at Midtown Kitchen on Chestnut Street earlier today. After I dropped her off at her apartment on Castleton Avenue, she realized she'd left her cup in my car. I went back to return it. She came out, grabbed it through the window, and went back inside. That's the entirety of what you observed." Elmond listened to all of that with the expression of a man who had already stopped listening somewhere around the third word. He tilted his head slightly and said, "You were observed passing an object through a vehicle window outside a known address." Broderick looked at him steadily. "I handed my daughter her cup. She's a law student at Temple. She lives in that building. I can give you her number right now if you'd like to call her." Elmond didn't respond to that either. He took a half step back and looked at the Audi. "I'm going to conduct a search of your vehicle." "On what basis?" "Reasonable suspicion." Broderick kept his voice completely flat. "Reasonable suspicion of what? Specifically?" Elmond had already moved toward the car. He wasn't engaging with the question because engaging with the question would have required him to construct an answer that could hold up to scrutiny, and somewhere underneath the certainty he was projecting, there was nothing solid to build that answer on. What he had was a black man, a car, a residential building, and something passed through a window. That was the entire foundation. And rather than examine that foundation for a single moment, he was proceeding as though it were concrete. A second unit arrived within 4 minutes. The officer who stepped out was younger than Elmond, quieter in his manner, and he positioned himself near the rear of the Audi without saying much. He was there as backup, and he was doing what backup officers sometimes do in these situations. He was deferring to the officer who initiated the stop, which meant that whatever Elmond had already decided, this second presence was now reinforcing it without independently questioning any of it. Broderick stood on the sidewalk and watched Elmond go through his car. He watched him open the center console, move through the glove box a second time even though the registration had already been retrieved from it, check the back seat, and crouch to look under the front seats. There was nothing in that car. There had never been anything in that car except the ordinary contents of a man's daily life. A laptop bag on the back seat, a legal notepad, a phone charger, 2 pens, a receipt from the parking garage at 601 Market Street dated that same morning, and the empty cup holder where his daughter's cup had been sitting 2 hours earlier. Elmond found all of that, and he kept searching anyway. The small crowd that had begun forming hadn't dispersed. The teenagers from the corner had moved closer. The man with the dog had stopped walking entirely. A woman who had come out of the dry cleaner with a plastic-wrapped coat over her arm was standing near the entrance watching, and she hadn't gone back inside. People recognized what they were seeing. They didn't need it explained to them. Broderick's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. Elmond came back from the car and stood in front of Broderick again. He hadn't found anything because there was nothing to find, and yet the energy coming off him had not shifted in the direction of acknowledgement or reconsideration. What Broderick noticed, and what the body cam was capturing from Elmond's own chest, was that the officer's jaw had tightened slightly, The way it does when someone has committed to a version of events and reality has failed to cooperate. What's in the bag in the back seat? My work bag. It contains a laptop, case files, and legal documents related to my work. What kind of work? Broderick paused for just a half second. Not out of hesitation, but out of the particular discipline required to answer a question simply when everything in your training and experience is recognizing the shape of the injustice unfolding in front of you. I'm an attorney, he said. Elman's expression didn't change. I'm going to need to look in the bag. That bag contains privileged legal materials. Sir, I have the right to... You do not have the right to search privileged legal documents without a warrant. And you know that. Broderick said it quietly, without heat, in the same tone he used when correcting a factual error in a courtroom. Not confrontational. Precise. Elman stared at him for a moment. Then he took out his notepad and wrote something down. What he wrote, the Bodycam would later confirm, was nothing connected to any actual legal justification. It was the performance of process in the absence of substance. The whole stop had now stretched past 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a man standing on a public sidewalk next to his legally parked car, having explained himself clearly and completely, having produced every document requested, having offered every reasonable form of verification available to him, while an officer who had initiated a stop on no lawful basis continued to treat the absence of evidence as a reason to keep looking rather than a reason to stop. The woman who had been standing in front of the dry cleaner had her phone raised now. So did one of the teenagers. So did a man who had pulled over in a white pickup truck and rolled down his window to watch. Whatever Elman had imagined when he pulled out of his parking spot on Castleton Avenue and followed that silver Audi, whatever outcome he had been moving toward. It was not this. It was not a sidewalk full of witnesses and recording devices, and a man who had not raised his voice once, whose hands had never left where they could be seen, and who was looking at him with the patience of someone who already knew exactly how this story was going to end. What broke the standoff wasn't Elman having a change of heart. It was a voice from the steps of the apartment building 2 doors down from the dry cleaner. A woman who had walked up from the direction of Castleton Avenue and had apparently been watching for longer than anyone realized. Travis? Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Do you have any idea who that man is? The woman who had spoken was Rosalind Silva. She was 63 years old, and she had lived in the Brewerytown neighborhood for 31 of those years. She knew every block between Castleton Avenue and Girard the way you only know a place when you have walked it in every season and every kind of weather. She had raised 2 sons in this neighborhood, buried a husband in this neighborhood, and watched it change in ways that were sometimes good and sometimes not. She was not a loud woman by nature. She was not the kind of person who inserted herself into situations that didn't concern her. But she'd been standing near the entrance of her building when Broderick's car first pulled onto Castleton Avenue that afternoon, and she had seen the whole thing from the beginning. She had seen Taryn come down the steps. She had seen the cup. She had seen Elman pull out and follow the Audi. And she had put on her coat and walked the 2 blocks to Girard Avenue, because something in her did not allow her to stand in a doorway and watch what she knew was coming without doing something about it. She walked past the teenagers with their phones. She walked past the man with the dog. She stepped around the woman from the dry cleaner and moved directly toward Officer Elman with the unhurried certainty of someone who had long since stopped being intimidated by uniforms. Elman turned to face her. "Ma'am, I need you to stay back. This is an active..." "I heard you the first time," Rosalind said. She wasn't being rude. She was simply not stopping. She came to a halt about 4 feet from Elman and looked at him with the kind of directness that older women in certain neighborhoods have earned through decades of watching things go wrong and being ignored when they tried to say so. Then she looked past him at Broderick, and something moved briefly across her face. Not pity, because Broderick Cortland was not a man who invited pity, but recognition, and something close to quiet outrage on his behalf. She looked back at Elman. "That man," she said, gesturing toward Broderick with a small, deliberate motion, "is Broderick Cortland. He is a senior federal prosecutor with the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. That young woman you saw at the window is his daughter. She lives in my building. They had lunch together today. She forgot her cup in his car. He came back to give it to her." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "That is what you stopped him for." Ellman said nothing. Rosalind wasn't finished. "I've seen him at that building more times than I can count. I've spoken to that girl in the hallway. I've seen him help her carry groceries up the steps." Her voice hadn't risen. If anything, it had dropped slightly, which made every word land harder. "You followed that man from Castleton Avenue because of what you thought you saw, and what you thought you saw was a black man in a car. That's all it was." The sidewalk had gone very quiet, not silent. There was still street noise, still the low sound of traffic moving on Girard. But the people watching had stopped shifting and murmuring. Everyone was still. Broderick had not moved. He was standing exactly where he had been standing for the last 23 minutes, hands at his sides, watching Ellman with an expression that was almost impossible to read unless you understood that the stillness on his face was not passivity. It was discipline. It was the practiced composure of a man who had spent 19 years in rooms where the stakes were high and the pressure was designed to make you crack, and who had learned that the most powerful thing you could do in those rooms was refuse to. Ellman looked at Broderick. Something was moving behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet, possibly not ever. But the first real evidence that the certainty he had been operating from for the last 23 minutes had developed a crack in it. He looked down at the license he was still holding. Broderick Cortland. He looked at the registration. Same name. He looked at the work bag in the back seat that he had tried to search and been legally and correctly refused. He looked back at Broderick and said nothing. Broderick spoke first. His voice was level and quiet, the kind of quiet that carries further than shouting. "I told you exactly what happened. I told you when you first approached my window. I told you when you asked me to step out. I told you when you asked where I was coming from. Everything I said was accurate and verifiable, and you chose not to verify any of it." He paused for just a moment. "Your camera has been running this entire time." That last sentence was not a question. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact delivered by a man who understood evidence, understood documentation, and understood precisely what that footage contained. 23 minutes of a legal stop with no lawful basis. 23 minutes of a man explaining himself clearly and being ignored. A search conducted on a vehicle with no probable cause. An attempt to access privileged legal materials without a warrant. All of it recorded. All of it time-stamped. All of it retrievable. Ellman took one step back, then another. Rosalind Silva turned and walked back the way she had come, past the teenagers, past the man with the dog, back toward Castleton Avenue. She didn't look back. She had said what she came to say. Broderick picked up his phone, which had buzzed 4 more times during the stop. He looked at the screen. 2 missed calls from the office. 1 text from Taryn that said, "Dad, are you okay? Someone in the building said there's police on Girard." He typed back 3 words. "I'm fine. Coming." He got back into the Audi. He started the engine. He pulled smoothly away from the curb and drove. Behind him, Officer Travis Ellman stood on the sidewalk on Girard Avenue with the body cam still running on his chest. And not a single person left on that sidewalk was looking at him with anything other than the cold, clear recognition of exactly what they had just witnessed. The body cam footage from Officer Travis Ellman's chest unit was pulled from the department's server the following morning. It wasn't pulled because someone filed a complaint overnight, though that was coming. It was pulled because 3 separate videos taken by people standing on that sidewalk on Girard Avenue had already been uploaded to social media before Broderick Cortland's Audi had cleared the next intersection. The clearest one. Shot by one of the teenagers from the corner, ran 2 minutes and 40 seconds and captured Ellman's back. Broderick standing with his hands visible, and Rosalind Silva delivering every word of what she said, with the camera close enough to pick up the audio cleanly. By midnight that Tuesday, it had been viewed over 400,000 times. By Wednesday morning, it had crossed 2 million. The Philadelphia Police Department's Internal Affairs Division opened a formal review of the stop by 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. They didn't have a choice. The footage request came from 3 directions simultaneously. internal affairs, the department's legal office, and an outside inquiry that the department's communications team was not prepared for. That third inquiry came from the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, where several of Broderick Cortland's colleagues had seen the video on their phones before they finished their first cup of coffee. The internal affairs review took 11 days. What the investigators found inside those 11 days went well beyond the stop on Girard Avenue. Ellman's record, pulled in full and reviewed without the filter of union intervention for the first time in his 6 years on the force, showed a pattern that his 3 prior complaints had only partially documented. 14 stops over a 4-year period in which no citation was issued, no arrest was made, and no contraband was found. 9 of those 14 stops involved black male drivers. 7 of the 9 had occurred in neighborhoods that Ellman had designated in his own field notes, using language that Internal Affairs flagged immediately as, quote, high-activity corridors, yet, a designation that existed nowhere in official departmental terminology and appeared to have been invented by Ellman himself to justify stop patterns that had no other documented basis. On the 13th day after the stop, Officer Travis Ellman was suspended without pay pending the outcome of the investigation. His union filed a grievance within 24 hours, the same way they had filed grievances over his prior suspensions. This time, the grievance went nowhere. The footage was too clear, the pattern was too documented, and the man he had stopped was too specifically positioned to ensure that none of it disappeared quietly into an administrative process. 31 days after the stop on Girard Avenue, Travis Ellman was terminated from the Philadelphia Police Department. The termination letter, which Broderick Cortland would later see as part of the civil proceedings, cited conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of departmental stop and search policy, failure to establish lawful basis for vehicle search, and conduct demonstrating a pattern inconsistent with constitutional policing standards. It was 4 paragraphs long. It had taken 6 years of complaints, 3 suspensions, and 1 very wrong decision on a Tuesday afternoon in October to produce those 4 paragraphs. Broderick filed the federal civil lawsuit 22 days after the stop, before the termination had even been finalized. The lawsuit named Ellman individually and the city of Philadelphia as a defendant, on the grounds that the department's repeated failure to meaningfully discipline Ellman, despite a documented pattern of unconstitutional stops, represented deliberate indifference to the civil rights of the people he was policing. The causes of action were unlawful detention, unreasonable search, and racial profiling in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Broderick did not hire outside counsel. He knew every attorney in the Eastern District worth knowing, and the lawyer who agreed to take the case had argued civil rights violations at the federal appellate level 14 times. Taryn Cortland gave a written statement to Internal Affairs investigators during the review period. She described the lunch, the forgotten cup, the text she sent her father, and the moment she came out of the building and leaned through the window to retrieve it. Her statement was 11 sentences long, precise, and completely consistent with everything her father had said on the sidewalk on Girard Avenue from the first moment Ellman approached his window. At the bottom of her statement, in the space marked for additional comments, she wrote 1 sentence that the investigators noted in their report and that would later be read into the record during the civil proceedings. It said, "My father told me exactly what to do if this ever happened. He told me years ago. That tells you everything." The Eastern District's press office released a formal statement 8 days after the stop. It was measured in its language the way institutional statements always are, but what it said underneath the careful wording was not measured at all. It confirmed Broderick Cortland's position, his tenure, and the nature of his work. It noted that the office was aware of the incident and was monitoring the department's response. It closed by stating that the Eastern District remained committed to the equal protection of every person within its jurisdiction, without exception. That last line was written by Broderick himself. Rosalind Silva was contacted by 2 local television stations and a national news outlet in the week following the video's spread. She declined all 3 interviews. She had said what she had to say on a sidewalk on Girard Avenue, and she didn't feel the need to say it again in a television studio. She went back to her building, back to her hallway, back to her neighborhood. The same neighborhood where she had watched things go wrong for 31 years, and where, on one Tuesday in October, something had gone differently. Broderick Cortland was back at his desk at 601 Market Street the morning after the stop. He had cases to prepare, hearings to attend, and a legal notepad that still had notes on it from the week before. He did not take a day off. He did not release a public statement of his own. He let the footage speak, because he had known from the moment he placed his hands on top of that steering wheel that the camera was running, and he had conducted himself accordingly from the first second to the last. The cup Taryn left in his car is still sitting on her kitchen counter on Castleton Avenue. She hasn't lost it since. If this story showed you that a badge is not a pass to violate someone's rights, and that accountability will always catch up, then hit the like button, share this video, and make sure you are subscribed to Bodycam Revealed. Every story we tell is a reminder that the truth has a way of coming out. We will keep telling it.
Seeking the truth is our ultimate mission. We dig deep to hold power to account, relying entirely on facts and data. Remember, the records never lie. Thank you for tuning in and supporting our work.